Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate it. This is a slightly unusual format because not only am I going to read some excerpts from my own book, A Clash of Innocence, as you see up there, which is the first book in my trilogy of novels set in modern-day Cambodia, but I'm also going to be presenting the work of the students of my writing workshop, which took place last weekend, Writing About Place, which I'll tell you more about later. A Clash of Innocence is, as I mentioned, the first book that I've written about Cambodia. And it was a huge shock to me that I would ever be interested in Cambodia, that it would ever be a place that I would be writing about. I went there with my younger son and my husband about 7 or 8 years ago now on a holiday, and I just fell in love with it. I was in the middle of writing my first novel, which is actually set in Moscow, as well as in London and in Boston. Had no idea that I would be interested in writing about Cambodia. And then after that first novel was published, the story just popped into my head. And it was really just a series of impressions that I had amassed while I was traveling around the country, working in an orphanage, building houses in a very remote and poor village, and just crisscrossing up and down. So that led me to write A Clash of Innocence. And I'm just going to read a few passages. They're not really about the plot. So I hope that you will read the book. If you haven't already, I have some friends out there who have. What you would need to know about the book itself is that it is set in Phnom Penh in the year 2007, and it is set against the backdrop of the beginning of the UN's tribunal to bring the Khmer Rouge to justice. The main setting for it is an orphanage in Phnom Penh that's run by an American woman who's about 60 years old. The whole book is in her voice, and her name is Deborah. She has adopted the eldest of the children who live in the orphanage, and that young woman's name is Sam. As so many people in Cambodia Americanize or Englishize their names to Sam, her name is Sam, which really stands for Samnang, which means luck. Who else do you need to know? There is another 16-year-old girl who lives in the orphanage, and her name is Shrey. I will tell you something special about her later. There is an Australian minesweeper who is a part of their lives. And then there's also a Cambodian doctor called Dr. Reith, who also helps them. Those are really the only names that you might hear. But basically, I'm going to read sections that are about place, because that's what the workshop was about. How do you describe place? How do you create a sense of place through words? I'll also mention that all the photos that you see here were taken by children at an educational shelter called Anjali House. This is a shelter where I now work for 2 months a year. I founded a writing workshop for these students. This is not an orphanage, which is an important distinction. All of these children live at home with their families, and Anjali House works with the families as well. But when the kids are not in Khmer school, they have a place to go so that they're not selling postcards in the temples or flutes on the street or God knows what else. These were all originally street working children, and now they have a place to be. And it was founded about 15 years ago, I'd say, maybe a little bit less, by French photojournalists. So there's a real kind of artistic bent to their approach to education, which is why my program of writing poetry and short stories has worked really well within the context of what they teach the kids. But all of these photos were taken by these kids, some of whom are 9 years old. The book is separated into chapters according to months, 9 months that cover this 1 year. and I'll start in March. I'm a snob. I don't mean to be, but sometimes I can't help it. This impulse to judge doesn't show up all that often anymore, but every now and again something will catapult me into an elevated sea of superiority. Phnom Penh itself is often the trigger. It is very easy, and I must admit understandable, to have a negative view of this place. Many people come here and only see the corrupted remains of a traumatic past. Yes, there is often garbage in the streets. There are rats living with riverside views that would make a wealthy Parisian envious. The pavements are so full of ramshackle shops you can barely squeeze past. Auto parts, household supplies, black market pharmaceuticals, trays and trays of ripped-off sunglasses and T-shirts. It can drive you crazy, and that's without even talking about the traffic. Many people come to Phnom Penh and see only these things, and those are the ones I can't help but feel sorry for. But there are others, visitors and residents alike, who walk these streets and see them the way I do. First, we see the colors. I never knew so many colors could coexist before I came here. Each store has umbrellas sparked with blues, whites, reds. Their windows, if they have them, are lined with goods arranged for symmetry of hue. Greens are stacked together, next to yellows, next to pinks. If there are tables outside the door, they're covered with azure cloth, nestled within an embrace of painted red chairs. Even the second-hand car transmissions piled up for sale gleam with silver and chrome. The streets are filled with colors, as are the people, as is their clothing, as are the emerald trees and opaline flowers. Monks in saffron robes rustle like whispers against yellow-orange walls. Temples gleaming white with golden roofs and red awnings hide around corners, waiting to jolt you into the memory that you are part of everything. You reflect the colors. You inhabit the aromas of jasmine, incense, tamarind. Whose eyes and hearts can be so closed that they don't feel embraced, engulfed, and reborn by this living place, by this Phnom Penh? Those poor blind souls who don't feel it, I feel sorry for. But the ones who do feel it all, who see it beyond their eyes, beyond their hearts, they automatically become a part of me. April. The next day we were all up and ready early. All the kids were bathed, every last one of them. Their hair was combed, their clothes ironed. Amanda had slept over the night before, and I should say Amanda is a young American woman, a backpacker, who knocks on the door one day of the orphanage wanting to help. And the book is really about how she infiltrates her way into the workings of the orphanage, the problems that arise, why is she there, why are any of the Westerners there. So Amanda had slept over the night before to make sure she was here early to help, and even Kyle had agreed to join us by 10 o'clock. It was to be a day full of ritual, and it started with one of my favorites. Everyone, beginning with Samnang, lined up in front of me as I sat on a stool in the back courtyard like something out of The King and I. Bowls of cool water with clean cloths were set on the ground beside me, and one by one, each of my children took turns washing my feet. Now there's a ceremony worth preserving. Everyone was quiet and respectful, and like every year, I was overwhelmed, not by the responsibility of being the only reliable parent for so many. No, it wasn't that, but rather for being so loved. When it was time for us to go to the Wat, we lined up all the kids in pairs. We placed the youngest up front with me, leading the way, the rest stretching back along the pavement. Sam and Amanda hovered in and out of the middle, while Kyle walked behind the rest, Shrey slinking her way beside him. There were 2 Wats within walking distance of our house, but for New Year, I always led us to the further, larger, more beautiful one. It was like walking into a carnival. Street musicians lined the painted walls surrounding the temple. The sound of drums and pipes drowned out the usual din of honking motos. Vendors sold nuts and candies wrapped in red and blue cellophane. Puppeteers darted in and out of our line, dancing with the kids, drawing them into the celebration. The world was suddenly alive with colors: oranges, whites, gold and saffron robes on the monks, flags like sunbursts whipping against a blue sky. Once inside the walls, one of our favorite monks, one who always manages to come by just when some new child has joined the home, led a small group of us to pray before the statue of Buddha, now adorned in its New Year robes of orange and yellow. Another group went to build the ceremonial mountain of sand, each new grain destined to bring more health and happiness. By the time I set off to deliver our gift of food to the monks, you could barely see them sitting there behind the bowls of rice, dried fruit, sticky sweets, pastries, and cakes. No matter how little the Cambodians have themselves, there was always food set aside for the monks, whose lives literally depend on the charity of the impoverished. As I placed my basket of coconuts and morning glories down with the rest, a boy's voice called out in English, "Cool, thanks. Tuesday Chinam Tamai." "And Happy New Year to you too," I answered, peeking around to see the face behind the voice. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. He sat cross-legged, his bare feet poking out from his robes. The telltale cords of an iPod dangled around his shaved head. A teenager first, and only then a monk. May. It didn't really take 10 hours to get to Kep. Now that we were nearly 2/3 of the way through this first decade of a new century, a road had been created to parallel the Mekong and connect the capital with the southernmost portion of the country. Notice I said created and not paved. Although tarmac was occasionally in evidence, just enough to make us feel as if the land beneath our borrowed wheels was under our control, more often than not, the road turned again to dirt, slowing our progress as if to remind us that this was indeed Cambodia we were crossing and nowhere else on earth. But given that it was May and the entire country was aching for rain, all that dirt had turned to dust. We kept the car windows closed for as long as we could, but eventually we had to open them. There is only so much that the air conditioner in a 12-year-old Toyota can do. We hardly cared, though. Sam and I were happy to inch along, in and out of tiny, nameless village after tiny, nameless village, smelling the sweet scent of ripe mangoes and bananas baking in the afternoon sun. It had been a while since we had ventured into this part of the country. Whenever we were able to get away, I tried to take us somewhere new. For all its faults, I do love Cambodia, and I want my kids to love it too, but not for its new luxury hotels and gilded palaces, not for its sharp-eyed entrepreneurs and go-getting hustlers, not even for the tradition of its monks or the beauty of its art. I want them to love their country as it is in its heart, where the need to recreate life with each new season is accepted and respected, where generations hold each other's hands and turn towards tomorrow, where hope refuses to die and laughter is used like fertilizer to keep their spirits growing. Some years we ventured north towards Siem Reap and the ancient temples of Angkor. 2 years ago, I took a group of boys to Tonle Sap Lake, where pigs live in water and alligators are raised like sheep. But Dr. Reith had said to head for the coolness of the sea, so we headed towards Kep and the Gulf of Thailand. Sam hadn't been there since she was little, and her excitement was growing with each kilometer. How much had changed, I wondered. Not much. One benefit of going slowly is that you can take your time to see what is outside your window and beyond the dust clouds. The countryside is so harsh and so beautiful. Fields of rice paddies stretch for miles, studded with the bony frames of oxen, white against dirt brown. Distant hills are clouded with haze like oases, mirages in a sun-parched expanse. Your eyes water as you stare, and you can almost remember that in just 1 month or 2, all of this will be flooded by the rising waters of the monsoon season. Trees will then look like bushes, those distant mountains like outcrops. This scenery has lasted forever, will last forever, ebbing and flowing with time and the seasons, green turning to brown and back to green again, earth becoming water, becoming earth, reminding us that of all the constants in this world, the most reliable constant is change. The roads are never empty, far from it. Roads here are not just ways of getting from one place to another. They are places in themselves. People live beside them. Animals walk in them. On their edges, makeshift shops sell everything from lotus flowers to transmission fluid. There are no curbs, no sharp delineations between spaces to move and spaces to stop. Everything is everywhere. Motos pull up beside ox carts, beside bicycles built for 5, beside open-backed trucks carrying 30 workers to the fields, beside air-conditioned buses filled with American tourists, besides Mercedes with government license plates and rolled-up windows, beside horses pulling trailers full of construction equipment, beside barefoot children walking, walking, walking. Like the earth that transforms to water, here the past merges with the future, leaving you with nothing else to do but work if you can in the mornings, rest as you must in the hottest part of the afternoon, and sleep as best you are able at night. Thank you. So those are some excerpts. Thank you. Those are some excerpts from A Clash of Innocence, which really is about murder, not so much who performs the murder, but who takes responsibility for murder. Writing and publishing that book, as I mentioned, led to my workshop in Siem Reap, where I go every year, which led to my taking Khmer lessons, which has led to a real commitment and a devotion and a connection with this country. And that has meant that this first book, which I had originally thought was going to be a single book, really became, in my mind, a part of a group of connected novels, a trilogy. So this is now the second novel, Out of the Ruins, which is going to be published in January. This one, instead of being set in Phnom Penh, this one is set up north in Siem Reap in a clinic that services the women in the community and is concerned with women's health, run by Western doctors. Actually, though, it's about the sex trade as well. So it's slightly darker, but my novels always have a sense of hope at the end. I couldn't bear to do it any other way. So this will be coming out in January, and I have to say, I think that the cover is spectacular. I really love it. And I'm in the process now of writing the third book in the trilogy, researching it, and that is going to be a fictional biography of one of the minor characters, the Cambodian doctor, as his life really reflects the history of modern Cambodia from 1960s to present day. So that is the story of me and my novels. This is an example of the literary magazine that we publish at the end of each of my workshops in Cambodia. This last one, which we did in March, is monstrous. It's 50 pages long, full of the writings in English of poetry and short stories by the teenagers there. It also has more of their photos and their drawings. It really is astonishing. But you know, this program is not about writing so much. It's certainly not about teaching them how to write poetry and stories. It's about giving them the opportunity to think conceptually, which is something that is not done in the Khmer schools. Giving them the permission to wonder about what their lives can be like outside of the temples, outside of the villages. And this is one program along with the other programs in the shelter, but it's working. We now have graduates, so to speak, young adults in their 20s who are studying to be nurses and midwives and computer scientists and have their own electrical businesses. And this is our way of helping to develop a middle class that's viable within Cambodia. So thank you very much for that. And I think, after I take a quick sip of water, what I would now like to do is introduce the participants in our Writing About Place workshop that we did here in this fantastic bookshop last Sunday. They are a little shy, so they're kind of sitting here in the front. I won't really make a big deal about them, but there are two others who couldn't be here, one of whom has given me permission to read his story to you. Maybe I'll start with that. His name is Josh, and he is British, but has lived in Phnom Penh, lived and worked there for 1.5 years, and feels like that is his home more than anything else. He's now living back here in London, or actually Milton Keynes, working and trying to figure out how Cambodia remains a part of his life. And he wrote this, and it's called Stone Witness. Whenever I forgot why I missed Cambodia, whenever I missed shepherd's pie, tea with milk, or my family, there was one place alone which provided a remedy, Angkor Wat. There's nowhere on earth quite like it, a squat stone deity rising from the Cambodian jungle, presiding over the kingdom with all her wisdom and experience, so passive and removed from emotion, above the petty concerns of the brief lives lived out around her. Carvings, both beautiful and terrifying, adorn her golden face, now gray and pocked by wear and violence, and remind me so clearly of the people who have passed through the chambers and hallways of this temple over hundreds of years. And the Apsara, oh, the Apsara, divinely beautiful, smiling knowingly, arrogantly, as they bewitch gods and kings with their celestial dances, of which men can create but a crude shadow. I have never seen such beauty in all my life, yet I find it here in this wild place, this testament to the power of nature to overcome humanity's feeble attempts to mark its temporary mark on this world we call our own. For what claim can we truly lay to any of this? These temples have seen empires rise and fall, kings and emperors shine and then are extinguished, philosophies and religions spew forth from the mind of men and then fade, forgotten, into oblivion. The bullet holes and scavenged statues are testament to the witness they have borne throughout the ages. And now, what do they witness? The poverty of a once proud empire and the cultural colonialism of an arrogant West? Perhaps. But also the new pride of a nation willing and able to rise from the ashes of war, revolution, and dictatorship. A nation as enduring in its beauty as the stone from which it carved these monuments. He is starting to write a blog, actually, that I think he is calling back from an ex-expat back from Cambodia, or something like that. If you're interested, it would be a good thing once he gets going to read it. And he's also been blogging about some of the events that are taking place throughout this month and into the next for the Sea Arts Festival, of which this is a part. Next. Who will go next? Would you like to come? Actually, you know what? I think we should keep you last so that we could do the microphone thing. Okay, so how about now we go to something that is very different, really charming. And this was written by Sam. And it's called The Mysterious Creature. I should tell you, what we did is that we read excerpts of different sorts of things written about place. We brainstormed, we talked about how we create images of place in words, and then, despite the rain, they went out into the area and just walked around and see what they came up with. And, well, this is called the mysterious creature, you'll see. The small garden near the train station attracts my attention since I just saw a kind of creature, a sculpture that looks like a crocodile popping out of the ground with its rocky marble-like skin. I can see only from behind at first, so it keeps me wondering what its face would look like. I walk towards its head and realize that on its back there are small plants coming out from its skin all the way up to its tail. Once reaching the front side of the creature, I still cannot recognize what kind of animal it is. Its shape resembles a whale, but it is a whale who lives on the ground, not in the sea, and the garden is full of them. I cannot describe what this really is, but I am wondering what the creature would look like if I really met it. The size of my mysterious creature is about the size of 3 adult people, so maybe it is a baby whale kind of size. There are birds making noise on top of those creatures, which makes it sound like my mysterious creature itself has the sound of a bird, a dove. The raindrop on its back makes its skin look oily, like the skin of a dolphin, but not as smooth. And now, a poem came out of this, and this is by Sinang, and I think it might be the first poem you ever wrote, maybe? Or you don't write poetry regularly, do you? No. And this is called Broken Reality. Feeling the serenity of time, watching the rain drop, waves spreading like flames. I'm floating in a glass full of water. All seems out of control and empty, but my senses are awake. I am alive. The physical world changes endlessly. I feel the vibrations of the table. A young man walks past a green car. I'm seeing the world through the eyes of a camera. And now I'd like to invite Sheena Kang up to read her piece.
So as I was walking around this area, it was raining, but it wasn't raining very heavily. It was just a few drops of rain. And I thought about the rain that I have back home where I'm from, and that's Singapore. That kind of tropical, torrential rain that we have is very different from the rain here in England. And I thought back on a time when I did experience a similar type of rainfall in Singapore. And that was a day when I had a very special memory with a childhood friend whom I hold really dear to my heart. So I'm just going to read out my story. The first part is really about Bankside, and then it kind of modulates into a scene from the past back home. So it's entitled A Shared Secret. Bankside was covered in a sheen of monochrome. Blackened brick buildings flagged soggy streets strewn with remnants of last night's hilarity. Coleslaw, a bag of knickknacks, pieces of bread that melded with the asphalt to form a canvas of greyness. These were scattered like offerings to the faceless spirits and beings that roamed the streets of London. In the distance, I spotted a pink bicycle chained to a lamppost. Proud and radiant, it stood out like a timeless symbol of youthful vibrancy amidst the subsuming grey. I spotted a trace of rain in the distance. It descended like fine hair against the emerald trees that fringed the cycling path, nuzzling the verdant grass that lay slumbering beneath. It was but early morning, and we managed to pedal out to the eastern part of the island to catch the first rays of dawn. An hour had passed, and now the air was suddenly pregnant with the smell of rain, and yet the sun shone relentlessly, strung up like a heavy ball of fire suspended on a thin gossamer thread. "It's raining," I said, "or at least I think it is." We slowed down on our bikes in unison. Strange. Pedaling forward, we crushed dead leaves and cycled around broken branches and fallen twigs, all untouched, strangely untouched by the silent pelt from the heavens above. visible yet intangible, seen but not felt. Around us, people carried on with what they were doing without a care in the world. Besotted couples nestled in each other's laps, perfectly oblivious to the curtain of rain that seemed to envelop them. A child ran ahead of his parents, screaming raucously and brandishing a popsicle in the air like a badge of honor. Dogs strained at taut leashes, their owners barking at them to slow down. No one seemed to notice the rain except us. We savoured this shared secret, lifting our faces to observe the pencil-thin marks of rain streaking the azure sky. We fancied it caressing our cheeks, like a divine secret gift that was unveiled only to the both of us, Laura and I. Back then, we were children of the earth. As we paddled on, the sky darkened and ominous clouds squatted overhead. We looked up expectantly and exchanged knowing glances. Any time now. And then fat drops of rain pelted down on our heads, relentlessly, unapologetically, soaking us to the skin. We cycled on and on, our heads thrown back in uncontrollable laughter as our pink bicycles glistened triumphantly in the rain. After what seemed like an unending dry spell in our sunny island of Singapore, it was finally raining.
Thank you.